Okay, thank you, Bob. Let's have a big hand for Bob and Go Vegan Radio. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work. And a big hand for the San Francisco Vegetarian Society and this great festival right at the end, but wonderful. Dixie May and everyone. Jeff, so many people have worked hard to make this another wonderful event. So thank you all for joining us here this afternoon, and I'd like to go ahead, actually, maybe I'll quickly do one thing here so that's not always shining there. Let's see here. Oh yeah, I can hear that noise pollution, you're right. It's not the greatest thing. All right, so there. Now, how many of you have actually read the World Peace Diet? Some of you only a relatively small minority. I'd like to do a few things here in the short amount of time we have, just about an hour or so, maybe a little less, and talk about some of what I think are the most important things we can be talking about today, probably the most important things we can be talking about, which is to understand our culture. And one of the points that I think it's really important for us to be aware of if we want to live a life of meaning and purpose and authenticity is that in order for us to do that, we're called to understand ourselves, to understand as best we can who we are, actually. This is an ancient call that has been heard through the ages for thousands of years. I think really all the spiritual teachers and the philosophers, both men and women, have said if we want to live a life of meaning, we have to understand ourselves. And what I've discovered over the past 30 years of doing research into our culture's mistreatment of animals for food and other products is that we live in a society that has a taboo. We're not supposed to be talking about what we're talking about here. So, just by being here, I think you already are showing yourselves to be pioneers in creating a new world, because the great taboo in our society is to look behind the curtain of our culture's routine mistreatment of animals. And I think when we do that, we begin to suddenly realize that our society is not as it appears to be, that actually there's this massive industrialized killing machine that has been operating here. It was here before we were born. It's not like we created it and it's our fault. This has been going on for between 8,000 or 10,000 years. We've been owning animals as property for food and other products, but primarily for food, and imprisoning them and mutilating them, inseminating them against their will, stealing their babies, making them our property, and killing them. And it's created a culture, I talk about this actually in Chapter 2 of the World Peace Diet, that's basically based on war and slavery and the domination of animals and women and ruled by a wealthy elite. And this society really, I think, at a deep level is obsolete. I think we all realize that. I mean, I don't have any agenda to criticize past civilizations for how they lived. It's very obvious when you read history that there was a lot of violence and killing. But for us today to be living the same way and having the same type of food, essentially, and the same system of slavery of animals, I think exposes a disconnect that is really at the very core of our society. So when I wrote the World Peace Diet, I had this feeling that I felt like somebody has to write a book. I kept thinking somebody else would write it, and nobody else wrote it. So all right, I guess I need to write it. That would give the big picture of our culture's routine mistreatment of animals for food, and basically show that this is the spinning fury at the core of our society's dilemmas. Usually we say that we have various problems, right? We have overpopulation and environmental pollution and climate destabilization and war and hunger and poverty and various things. And animal cruelty is another problem. It's like one of many problems, but it's not really a serious problem because, these other problems are humans, and animal cruelty is just a problem for animals, and animals are much less important than we are, so that's a pretty far down on the list problem. That's not a very important problem. Animals are suffering, but, we got a lot more important things to think about than that. And what I realized is actually that our cruelty, our abuse of animals, routinely, as I keep saying, is actually not down on the list. It's actually number one on the list. It's actually the very core violence and abuse that we engage in that basically gives rise to everything else. Because not only is it the driving force behind the physical, actual problems that we're having, it's actually also the driving force behind the underlying mentality that causes those behaviors and also causes us not to be able to address them effectively, to be able to just be unable to address the problems we're having to the point where they seem to just keep mushrooming further and further out of control. So the point here then underlying all that is, and I'll try to do this quickly, what usually ends up happening, I can feel it already happening, is that there's way more material that I want to present than I have time to present it in, right? The World Peace Diet is an audiobook. It's 13 and a half hours long. And as a vegan, I don't like to cause unnecessary suffering to other sentient beings. and these seats look pretty hard, and you're not going to be. And I don't want to talk. But typically, I end up talking faster and faster because there's so much I want to share with you. And in a short amount of time, I can just basically touch on a few of the main points here. But briefly, the main points are this: on the outer world, looking at our society. For example, if we could just, in a sense, come from outer space and land here, and we weren't programmed, right? We just sort of land here, we look around, what's happening. It would be very obvious to us. I think if we would radio back up to the mothership, say, what are they doing down there on planet Earth? What they're doing, basically, what we are doing more than any other activity by far is we're killing and eating a lot of animals. That's the primary activity of human beings on this planet, by far, in terms of our actions, what we're doing, how it's affecting the environment and ourselves and our health and our government and economy and everything. We're killing, for example, in the United States alone, 75 million animals for food every day. That takes a huge industrialized killing machine that reaches its tentacles everywhere, right to the bottom of every ocean, to the core of the rainforest, into every institution in our society, into every house, pretty much every house you ever go to. You just look at where they make their food, and there's meat and dairy and eggs and so forth in there. So it's reaching everywhere. And what I've discovered is that the tentacles that I'm talking about, whatever they touch, they harm. They terribly harm. And it also reaches its tentacles into the cells of our own being and into the landscape of our inner feelings and emotions and our way of thinking about the world. So animal agriculture is just, there's no way to overstate how devastating animal agriculture is to our earth and to us, and to animals, and to wildlife, and to future generations, and to hungry people, and to slaughterhouse workers, to this whole mandala of interconnected life. And so when we get a sense of that, I think it's enormously empowering. It's bad news on one level, but it's only bad news because it's been covered up. But basically, again, I just take a couple minutes here, but just environmentally, for example, killing that many animals, we have to feed that many animals, right? So it takes enormous amounts of grain. We lived Natalie and I in an RV for 17 years. We just finally bought a house after 17 years up in north of here, about a couple of hours. But we saw everywhere, pretty much, huge fields of genetically engineered monocropped corn and soy and alfalfa. It's not to feed humans. It's to feed the animals who you never see. They're imprisoned in these thinking sheds their entire lives, but they need to eat a huge amount of food. And so this whole massive amount of pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and so forth that are sprayed on these fields that go into the water, that are causing the death and the extinction, really, of butterflies and bees and birds and fishes. It ends up in the water. It's euphemized as nutrient-rich runoff, but basically it's causing huge dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. There's like 27 major dead zones in the oceans now, and they're growing constantly. And so animal agriculture, the waste of this, the pesticides, and like I say, and also the sewage, because basically the problem with animal agriculture is that it is just enormously inefficient and wasteful. It's almost like if we took our best scientists and said, listen, fellas, work really hard and come up with some kind of a system for feeding people that wastes as much as possible, that causes as much misery and suffering as possible, that causes the most amount of disease as possible. You couldn't come up with a better system than what we're doing. It's just a genius, right? If you really want to just waste food and cause a massive environmental devastation, feeding all this grain and legumes, that corn and soy and other things that we could essentially land and inputs, water and land and so forth that could feed people, and yet we're feeding it to these animals. Where these animals turn this into four things, basically. They turn it into saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying animal protein, and huge amounts of sewage. One large pig operation has more sewage than entire New York City, right? These are massive, and it's pretty much unregulated because the industry does not want to be regulated, so it's not. And so they have enormous power. And so environmentally, just the water pollution, air and soil, and the use of water, the overuse of water, and it also creates huge amounts of methane and nitrous oxide, which are far more powerful in terms of global greenhouse gas emissions than carbon dioxide. They also, unfortunately, we're cutting down the rainforest right now at the rate of an acre per second. This is the most recent studies have shown this. An acre per second of rainforest. This is incredibly rich celebration of life. It's not a tree forest. These are ecosystems that took millions of years to evolve, and we're cutting them down in an acre per second, 24 hours a day. The driving force behind that is people taking out their wallets and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs. It's something we vote for. So we have to realize that this kind of devastation is causing not only the loss of habitat, and these are the lungs of the earth, so we're causing really our own demise by doing this, oxygen and so forth, and climate destabilization, but also really one of the main reservoirs of genetic diversity. So we're also causing, scientists don't know exactly what the numbers are, but somewhere in the range of 100 to 300 species a day are being driven into extinction by this same behavior of taking out my wallet and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs. So it's a direct attack on the genetic diversity of planet Earth by human beings, not just by human beings, but by people wanting to eat meat and dairy. Because the driving force behind the cutting down of the rainforest is to grow soy. It's just not for tofu. This is soy that is fed to imprisoned pigs and cows and chickens and factory farmed fishes. Most people don't realize that factory farmed fishes eat huge amounts of grain and soy. That's part of the system. And then they feed the fish either to other fish, or they feed them to people, or they feed them to livestock. And so we have also the overfishing of the oceans, to the point now where oceanographers are saying that vast areas of the oceans are completely overfished to the point there's nothing left. I mean, they're just dead. It's huge, like deserts, just lifeless areas that used to be teeming with fish. When the Europeans came over here, when they first came from Europe, they were literally, according to the journals that they wrote, afraid that their ships would run aground on these vast schools of fish that were so thick they didn't think they could even sail through them. And today the fisheries are totally collapsed. They're gone. In the last, since 1985, the fishing capacity has increased every year. We have more ships and more high-tech ships. They can catch more fish. The fish don't have a chance, and yet every year since 1985, the actual catch of fish has gone down because the fish are gone. So now we have what's called aquaculture, which is basically factory farming of fish. And if you think factory farming of animals is cruel and violent and miserable, factory farming of fish takes it to a whole other level of hyper-confinement and these poor fish swimming in their own feces in black toxic water, suffering hideously. So, and then these animals, and the reason the demand for fish is so vast is that we're, as scientists have discovered a few decades ago, that if you feed fish to animals, like to cows, for example, it's good for profits, right? They'll fatten up faster, they'll give more meat, give more milk, and so forth. So huge amounts of fish are not being fed to people, they're being fed to animals. So when people say, for example, that we should be eating meat, well, what do you think? Should cows be eating meat? But no, I mean, have you ever seen cows running across the field and jumping into a stream and trying to catch a fish? But cows are eating, like I say, more fish than humans are. So when people say, this is a very important point, I think, and I want to emphasize this maybe in the beginning, that the basic message I'm giving here, I feel, is a very positive message. We are devastating the planet and our culture and our health through animal agriculture, but the point is that we're voting for that ourselves, and we can change how we vote, and we can talk about this to other people, and we can, I hope, and I feel confident, actually, that we can have a fast change. We need to have a fast change, and we can do that. So the basic message, I think, is that there's nothing more important we can do than to make an effort to understand the ramifications of our actions, especially when they're around food. Food is our most powerful connection to nature, our most powerful connection to our culture. It's the main way that we are indoctrinated in any culture, that we are socialized. The norms and values of any society are passed primarily through food rituals. So when we look deeply into our food rituals, we see this is the main way that our basic underlying attitudes about our relationship with each other and our economy and our government and the way we set up our families, all of that is profoundly affected by the values in our food system, which are unfortunately not in our best interest. But as I'm getting back to what I was saying, so animal agriculture is really based on not only devastation to animals and wildlife and ecosystems, the rainforest being cut down, oceans being overfished because we need so much fish. We're feeding, now, as I said, fish to cows. And cows wouldn't normally eat meat. And most of these animals that we're eating are not carnivorous, right? But they're feeding them huge amounts of meat. And so this is something I think is important to remember. If you, as a human being, are eating meat, it's basically the same situation, or dairy. It's the same situation as these animals. These animals are not eating meat. Cows are not eating huge amounts of meat because the farmers, their exploiters, are being kind and compassionate to them and thinking, oh, gee, I like meat, I'll give it to my cows, they must like it too. They're doing it as a way of exploiting them, of making more money off of them. And it makes them very sick. I mean, a cow naturally would be eating grass, right? But then they want to push her to give more milk, for example. So they give her grains, which causes terrible distress physically. They get all, E. coli, all kinds of problems because it makes them give more milk. But they don't just stop with grains, they give them meat. And it's the same with us. If we're eating meat, it's not because it's in our interest, it's because it's in the interest of our exploiters. That's why we're eating meat. We're forced into it from the time we're little kids by what I refer to as the military-industrial meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media complex. Right? It's this vast complex, and it gets very wealthy, gets very rich when there's a reliable flood of sick people who will not ask questions, who will just do what they're told, who will go to war if they want to, who will buy stuff, who will believe the official stories. And what veganism is essentially, more than anything, it's questioning the official stories. Question the official protein story, question the official calcium story, question the official whatever they are, the superior species story, all these stories that we're told that are all lies and that basically create a context that is, for all of us, is not in our best interest. The beauty of it is that we can question this. And as we do that, we create an alternative. So animal agriculture on the outer level is by far the most devastating thing we're doing to our beautiful Earth. Have you noticed, I'm sure you have if you're living here, how beautiful planet Earth is? Today we had a chance to just see animals celebrating. We got up early and went to the Marin Headlands, and we saw seals playing in the water, and pelicans and cormorants and other birds. And life is a celebration. It's meant to be a celebration for us on this Earth. We've created a prison, not only for the animals, but for ourselves, by animal agriculture. It's like all the world religions teach the same thing. They say basically whatever you most want for yourself, give that to others. If we want to be free, we have to free those who we are imprisoning. And as a society, we don't do that. We imprison these animals and we create for ourselves, as a consequence of that, we create an imprisoning system that unfortunately in many ways sucks our freedom away from us through financial and other means. And so the whole idea here is to really understand that the animals are at our mercy as we show them mercy and kindness and compassion and let them be healthy, let them celebrate their lives, let them enjoy this beautiful Earth, that we will then be worthy to live on this beautiful planet and to live in harmony here. But right now, we're not worthy of it, unfortunately. We are still so immature as a society, spiritually and culturally and emotionally, that we are attacking this Earth and animals just viciously, actually, unfortunately. I mean, that's the reality of it. And so what veganism is, again, underlying everything, is questioning all of that, and it's love. Veganism is love because it's saying I'm going to actually not only just love my little in-group, my family and my friends and myself, but all human beings. But I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to love all expressions of life and ecosystems and future generations and have compassion and take responsibility as best I can for the larger order. And I think when we start to have a feeling for life and a feeling of respect for other living beings, then we begin to have a sense of respect for ourselves. So I think ultimately it's an enormously liberating experience to begin to question the food system and begin to move our lives into alignment. And I think there's no more subversive, in a sense, action anyone can take than to bring my life into alignment with my own values. And vegan values actually are our own values. So the basic idea is to understand that there's no greater gift we can give to the Earth and to the ecosystems of this Earth than to move to a plant-based diet for ethical reasons. Because when we do that, we just shrink our environmental footprint massively. The statistics are like somewhere like 30-to-1 in terms of fresh water use. In other words, 30 people eating a plant-based diet use as much water, fresh water, as one person eating the standard Western diet. Now, this is a wonderful gift we can give to the world to just move to a plant-based diet. And it's same thing is true with land and petroleum and pollution and so forth. It's closer maybe to 15 to 1. But these are still huge changes, positive changes that we can make in our own life to help relieve the enormous burden that we humans are placing on the earth to move to our plant-based diet. The same thing is true with our culture. And we have a culture where there's just built-in violence, where there's war going on continually, and yet we know, no one argues this, we're growing enough food every single year to feed between 12 and 15 billion people, right? We're growing enough to feed more than twice the population of human beings. And yet we have a situation where there's built-in roughly 1 to 2 billion people, again, nobody argues this, people who are chronically hungry and starving. How is it Homo sapiens, the wise Homo, right, the wise human, are so inept that we can be growing enough food to feed twice the number of people we have, and yet we have a seventh of our brothers and sisters starving? What's going on? Well, it's obvious. Basically, we have a system where those who live in less industrialized nations of the world, who have less high-powered economies, are not able to afford food, grain, basically, rice and other grains to eat, vegetables and so forth, because people in the more industrialized nations of the world who have higher powered economies, it's not difficult for us to drive up the price of grain in the world market, to feed to our imprisoned pigs, cows, chickens, and fishes, and eat their flesh and secretions, while these people starve, and then we build large-scale military complexes to assure that the meat and dairy and eggs keep flowing to us, to assure that those people don't complain, and to make sure that we enforce an iron fist on the rest of the world. And because this kind of inequity, there's an old saying, you can never have peace without justice. And this is patently the most unjust thing, when some people are eating so high off the hog, they're taking huge amounts of land and grain and water and everything else and eating meat and dairy, while people right over here don't have enough to even feed their kids. So this is going to create conflict. And so we have a situation where we could have peace, but it means we have to have justice. We have to have more equality. We have to have a more equitable distribution of resources. And meat and dairy are by far the most severe case of inequity. Besides the fact, the other thing is that the actual creation of meat and dairy causes so much trauma. The actual workers, the slaughterhouse workers, the factory farm workers, the people that have to do to the animals what we would not want to have to do. Madeline and I, as we've been traveling around, in our RV for 17 years, visited stockyards and factory farms and slaughterhouses, and I hate to see what these poor people have to do. They're just doing the terrible things, and so these people have the highest rates of worker-related injuries and suicide and drug addiction and alcoholism, spousal abuse. They go back into their communities and neighborhoods and do terrible things because the work they're doing shuts down their natural compassion and wisdom, makes them very frustrated, and they get alcoholic or they hurt people around them. So the point here is that the animals themselves are traumatized. The perpetrators, basically the ones who are wielding the electroshock prods and the knives and beating them and all these things, they have what psychologists refer to as perpetrator-induced traumatic stress disorder. So then they cause trauma in their society. And what I realized is animal agriculture is basically a whole web of trauma. And Martin Luther King, in his great wisdom, said something that I think many great spiritual and cultural leaders have said. He said, violence anywhere hurts everyone everywhere because we're all interconnected. All life is connected, right? We know that. That's our intuitive wisdom understands that. And so what veganism is essentially is saying compassion and kindness and mercy anywhere blesses everyone everywhere. And we can engage in those behaviors and practice kindness and mercy. And so when we see, instead of inflicting trauma, because if I take out my wallet and pay for ribs in a restaurant, right? I go into a restaurant, I say, I want to have some ribs. And I pay for that, and I take out my, and that is actually somewhere, because of what I just did, there's going to be a whole traumatic thing's going to happen. And animals are going to be imprisoned, stabbed, raped, everything else. And the wait person there who takes my order says something like, ribs. You're a smart guy. Yeah, we have great ribs, sir. Yeah, you must be a very, very very highly refined taste. Good choice there. She doesn't say, "You jerk, you barbarian! Don't you know what you're doing? You're causing death and destruction and misery." So, and if I go into the same restaurant, or most restaurants say I'm a vegan, they say, "Well, what the heck? Get out of here. We don't want you here." They don't really, as vegans, we're doing the best thing anyone can do to actually create a world of abundance and peace and freedom and equality and sustainability, and yet, we're not really respected for that typically. And so, so this is the situation we find ourselves in. It's so ironic. We're doing what we can do to create a better world for everyone, and yet, of course, it's easy to feel rejected by people because of this. So the underlying idea is to realize that animal agriculture is the most devastating thing we're doing, not only to the outer world, but to our society, to the culture that we live in. And we want to have cultural health, we want to have ecological health, we also want to have physical health. There's been a lot of other speakers here who have talked about the immense benefits of eating a plant-based diet, right? I mean, for our own health. I have a whole chapter in the World Peace Diet called The Intelligence of Human Physiology that goes into this, and I won't go into it too much, except just to say that when you really look carefully and look deeply into human physiology, I think like somebody said, look at your teeth, a dentition. We have the size and shape of our teeth, the hardness of our teeth. All these different things are the length of our digestive system, the blood circulatory system. We're just not designed to handle animal foods like cows. I mean, cows, we can feed them meat. They can figure it out. They can eat it. They can fatten them up. They can give them more milk. They can give them bigger breasts or whatever. That's highly prized. But basically, it's hard on them. So we can eat meat and dairy. Our bodies will adjust to it. But the basic underlying truth is that the nutrients that we need, that no animal needs to suffer. So think about that for a minute, how beautiful that is, that actually all of us, all human beings on this planet, we basically have the same physiology. And all of us have received a gift, this beautiful gift by the benevolent creator of the universe, of a physical vehicle that does not require any animal to suffer to get the nutrition that we need to thrive and to celebrate our lives here. And yet, all of us have been born into a culture where we've been forced from infancy to take that gift we've been given by the benevolent universe and creator and just throw it right back into her face or his face and say, well, you know what, we're going to stab animals anyway and kill them and eat their flesh and cause terror and misery and feed it to our children. And that action right there is not only turned out to be the most devastating thing to the environment and to our society and created this huge war machine and war mentality, but it also turns out to be what shuts us down spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically. And I think that in some ways is even worse, because when that happens, then we're unable, it's like our hands are tied behind our back and we're trying to solve these problems and we're not using the resources that we have. We don't have our intelligence. I have a whole thing in the World Peace Diet based on systems theories that intelligence is the ability of any system to make connections, right? And so we're a system, the earth is a system, animals are systems, and so to make connections that are relevant. And so when we're forced to eat animal foods as little infants, what we're forced basically to do is to disconnect, to learn to disconnect. And rituals are the most powerful learning modes. I mean, the most powerful learning comes through rituals, and meals are the most basic ritual in any society. So extremely powerful learning goes on through meals. It's the primary way we learn about our culture and about reality here. And so every meal basically is injecting into all of us from the time we're little infants a program or a way of thinking that reduces our intelligence and our natural wisdom and compassion. Because the subtext of every meal is about, I would say, 3 or 4 main characteristics. Number one, we're injected with a mentality of reductionism. Every meal is basically injecting into us this mentality that these animals that we're eating are not animals. They're not beings. They're just things. They're just commodities that we buy and sell like they're sacks of cement. We don't care about their sentience. We don't care about them as beings. We just reduce them. So we create reductionist religions, reductionist science. We have a reductionist way of living. We commodify everything. We look at a forest in terms of board feet. This whole reductionist mentality is really the precursor in many ways to a lot of the violence in our society and our way of treating animals and ecosystems. So reductionism is that's injected with every meal. And then on top of that, a mentality of exclusion. We learn with every meal to just exclude. Don't care about them. So what veganism is really is radical inclusion. It's saying I'm going to include all beings in the sphere of my kindness and compassion. And then another one is a mentality of predation, that we're essentially predatory, right? I mean, that when we see a little squirrel, there's nothing more we want to do than to just jump on that, rip it apart, and have the hot blood in our mouths. We're predators, right? I mean, it's teaching us this terrible, ridiculous lie about our true nature. And it's also, the subtext of every meal also is of essentially of might makes right, of privilege and elitism, that certain beings are inherently superior, right? And that other beings are inherently inferior. And that it's just fine for the inherently superior beings to dominate and exploit and use however they like the inherently inferior beings. So we wonder why we create a society with such dramatic inequity, of such classism, and sociologists say this is probably the most devastating thing in our society is you have some people, a tiny minority that has so much wealth and power, and so many people that barely have enough to get by, yet every single meal is injecting that teaching into the entire population, essentially. So how could we not create a society like this? See, if we have to understand this, if we want to have any impact, any possibility for our actions to create a more just and sustainable and peaceful world to be other than just merely ironic, like we want for ourselves what we refuse to give to others, to animals, but to actually yearn to give to these beings who are vulnerable in our hands what we would like ourselves, again, then we would be worthy ethically and morally and spiritually to have a society of justice and freedom. Our treatment of animals, see, the thing is, we don't realize, I think, essentially, that the animals of this earth, even though, how many of you have, at some point in your life have had a companion animal of some kind? Some of you, yeah. So you know that animal, she or he had interests, right? They have interests. They don't want to be locked in the closet, right, and starved or have their tail stepped on or be impregnated, against their will. All these things, their babies stolen from them. So these beings have interests that are to them as important to them as my interests are to me, and yet we constantly we don't care about their interests. So what veganism is essentially is questioning that whole thing, including non-human animals in the sphere of our concern. But what I was saying is that this mentality of violence towards animals gets its roots into us at a very deep level through our meals, and we begin to see them as things in every single meal, and underlying that is the disconnectedness. This is probably, I think, the worst thing, actually. It would be very ironic and very unusual for someone at breakfast, maybe having some bacon or something, to say, "I wonder what she was like," right? I wonder what she was like. We just learn to see merely a thing. We learn to disconnect. So every single meal is a ritual of disconnectedness, of privilege and elitism, of not giving to animals what we would like to have for ourselves. And the other thing I think I should mention is that it's also injecting into all of us a repression of Sophia. Sophia is the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. I refer to Sophia as really the living sacred feminine within all of us. Whether we are men or women, we have this capacity that yearns to naturally love and protect life. And so forcing little kids to eat meat and dairy is really repressing that enormously. I remember myself, for example, when I was a little kid, I was born and raised in a family where we ate the usual meals of lots of meat, dairy products, and eggs. And I remember when I was maybe 7 years old, I said to my mother, "So, Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this what everybody eats?" And my mother just said, "Yeah, everybody eats this. This is what everybody eats." And then she came back a few minutes later. She said, "Well, there are vegetarians." And she said it in this way that I knew these people must live on another planet, because she said she'd never met one in her entire. She said, "I never met one." She was like really old, to me, so she never even met one. So and my mother was right. I never met a vegetarian. And when I was a little bit, or I guess right around that time, actually, I was maybe 6 or 7. My little sister was maybe 2 or 3. And my mother was having me feed my little sister, right, in the high chair. And so I was feeding. And my mother said, "Make sure she eats her protein," right? That's a euphemism for the meat. And so I was feeding her the protein, and the vegetables and the potatoes. She would eat that stuff, but she kept spitting out the meat. And so I would try to get her to eat it. I was basically forcing her to eat it, because I was told that she might die of a protein deficiency if she didn't eat her meat. I didn't want it to be my fault that my little sister dies, so I was like ramming it down her throat. After I would try to make it interesting. I'd make it like an airplane. "Here comes the protein." She spit it out. So this is the situation. You know, we're just as little infants. We don't have to just watch these adults who we totally depend on for our life, watching them eat meat and dairy. You know, the secretions of these pork and flesh. We have to eat it ourselves. I forced her to eat it. So I'm very happy to stand before you here actually this afternoon and be able to say to you that my little sister is now a vegan. Yay! She went vegan, and my little sister's daughter is a vegan also, and my little sister's daughter has 2 little boys, and they're vegan from birth, right? So, and my mother is vegan also. I mean, I'm telling you, I had to really work hard. And Madeline's mother, who's 94, my mother's 86, Madeline's mother, who's 94 in Switzerland, she's also a vegan. So we're able to get the message. So I think, you know, we can see progress can be made. We just, you know, the basic thing is to just keep harping away, right? Keep planting the seeds as best we can. Keep trying to be an example of this also. And then don't be attached to the action. You may or may not succeed. I can't necessarily say. But I think, you know, in a way, in the bigger picture of things, I think, in a sense, there's 2 kinds of people in the world. There's vegans and pre-vegans, right? So anyone who's not a vegan, in a sense, sooner or later, I think in the vast unfoldment of life in the universe, everyone is eventually going to go vegan, because it's just our true nature of making connections and living our lives in harmony with our purpose, actually, at a deep level. That is what is called for. We can see that eating animal foods, animal agriculture, at its core, is devastating to our earth, to our culture, to our health, to our physical, psychological, and mental and spiritual health, that it basically devastates the inner landscape of our wisdom and intelligence and of our self-respect. And so coming back to our home and coming back to what Donald Watson created, this word vegan. So what I learned is that the only reason, like when we leave here and we go out into San Francisco or Marin or Oakland, wherever it is, we go back home, we see people eating meat and dairy, see people going into McDonald's and Burger King and so forth. We have to always remember that these people are basically eating meat and dairy for one reason. That one basic reason is they are following orders. That's the reason. They're just following orders. These orders get injected so early and so deeply from such an early infancy from people we trust so completely, our own mothers and fathers and ministers or whoever it is, you know, teachers, government officials, every institution in our society, they all agree and they inject it incredibly. They make us eat it. I mean, you can't get more powerful than that, just actually eating something. So the fact that anyone goes vegan in a way is a miracle, I think. I mean, it takes a lot to actually question that programming at a deep level and actually change. And so for me, though, and I think this is why this is so important, the only way I could change was to have the example of others. You know, so I went away to a summer camp in Vermont. I remember I killed my own chickens. This was a beautiful little farm, so-called, where nothing bad could ever happen to anybody. You know, but I killed chickens. We killed cows. We killed the dairy cows when they were only 4 or 5 years old. We put a gun to their head and shot them and killed them because their production declined, and we cut them up right there. I was participated in that. I saw it, but I was so indoctrinated. I was maybe 13 or 14 years old. That I couldn't question it. I thought, well, this is what God wants. God gave us these animals. They taste good. They don't have a soul. It says so in the Bible. They don't have a soul. It says right in the Bible, you'll die of a protein deficiency if you don't eat these animals. You know, I knew it was in there somewhere. So, you know, it just came from the church taught. Everybody taught it. So it was just, I went away to college. I started to hear there were a few vegetarians around. This was back in the early 1970s, but like my mother said, you'll never meet one. I never met one. And then eventually I left home. I went on a spiritual pilgrimage. Actually, it's so fun to give this talk in San Francisco because I thought back in 1975 I was going to attain cosmic consciousness, and the way I was going to do that was that I was going to go to San Francisco and find it in San Francisco. I thought, I was in Massachusetts. So my brother and I tried to get to San Francisco. We got as far as Buffalo. And in Buffalo, we decided to just head south because it was October, it was getting cold. So we walked all the way down through upstate New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, into Tennessee. And we got there at the end of the year in Tennessee. And I remember we ended up hearing about and going to and living for a while at a place called The Farm. And The Farm came right out of Golden Gate Park. Actually, Stephen Gaskin had a class out here somewhere. And they created a big hippie commune. There was about 900 people, mostly from this Bay Area, living in Tennessee at that point. And they were all what they called vegetarians. And so I saw 900 people living on the land, growing their own food, eating and actually they said vegetarians because no one heard of the word vegan in 1975. But there was no dairy or eggs either. And so that was it. I saw this example. They were thriving. There was probably 200 kids that were vegan from birth, and they were doing great. And so this was just a revelation for me. I remember talking to this fellow, and I said, so why are you guys vegetarians? And he said, well, there's two reasons. Number one is, it takes so much grain to feed these animals, and people are starving. So eating meat and dairy is causing hunger and starvation, and we want to create a world of peace, so we're not going to be part of that. And the other thing is, he said, do you know what these animals go through? And I said, oh, don't tell me, I don't want to hear about it. And he said, well, all right, I'll just tell you briefly. And he just said maybe like one sentence. He said, the animals that people are eating are raised in these stinking sheds in their own excrement, where the ammonia is so thick they can hardly breathe. They're stuck in hyper confinement. They can barely move, and they're routinely mutilated in a variety of ways. Their beaks are chopped off, and their ears are notched, and their tails are docked, and they're castrated without anesthesia and put on these rape racks, and their babies are stolen, and then they're taken off and hung upside down by one leg, and they're stabbed and killed. And it was like, it's like in The Wizard of Oz when Toto pulls the curtain back, it's like, now I see. It's like I saw suddenly this vast hell realm that we force all these innocent animals, really. I mean, what did they ever do to us? And we just punish them and torture them. And then the irony is we actually eat that stuff. We eat it. We feed it to our children. But I had this example of all these hundreds of people that weren't doing that. So that was it. I never ate meat again in my life since that day, in 1975. When I said that, And thank you. I should thank them. And then I found out, actually, years later, there's this young Swiss artist in Switzerland who I ended up marrying many years later, also never ate meat again in her life, the same month and year, in 1975. And a few years later, I got out here, I found out about the routine cruelty to dairy cows and to hens for dairy and eggs. So I became a vegan in 1980. And then a few years later, went to Korea and shaved my head, became a Zen monk. I was living actually at KDK here in San Francisco, a Tibetan Buddhist meditation center, and then a Zen center and so forth. But anyway, I ended up as a Zen monk in Korea, and we were just meditating, from 3 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, and I realized I was in a community that had been practicing, again, what we would call veganism for 700 years, like since they started in the 1200s. No meat, dairy, or eggs, no wool or silk or leather, even mosquitoes, you would try to just take them outside, not kill them. There was this whole emphasis on kindness and compassion and mercy and doing a lot of meditation and introspection. And so, to me, this was a real revelation. I realized that veganism is not some newfangled hippie idea from California. It's actually an ancient spiritual teaching that goes back thousands of years. It's the core of every world religion. It's the essential wisdom of human beings is that violence not only harms others, it puts us into a prison. When we abuse and harm others, we harm ourselves. We are interconnected. And so I realized that through that meditation practice and just sitting so long, for so many months and everything in silence, I realized that what I am and what really all of us are and all beings are infinite eternal consciousness. We manifest for a while through a physical vehicle, and we're raised in a society where we're taught to identify with this one little thing, this object, this material thing. But it's a terrible illusion in a sense. It really shuts us down and makes us compete with each other and fight, and we don't realize that what we are is far greater than this, and that our true nature is kindness and compassion, and that we have a purpose here, which is to live a mission of awakening to the truth that we are and blessing others and finding the unique way that we have to do that, and to encourage not only others to do that by doing it ourselves, but that really we are on a planet where there's so much abundance here. We could feed everyone on a fraction of the land. We could celebrate our lives here. There's nothing stopping us from that except these injected meat and dairy and egg, dominating and exploiting and harming animals, and the mentality of that, which then we naturally start doing it to each other. So when I came back from Korea, I remember I felt like I had these roots of veganism that went to the very core of my being, and so a few years later I started talking to Madeline, and I realized, there's been all these books written about how eating meat and dairy is bad for your health, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for animals, but I realized it's much bigger than that. It goes way bigger. It's our whole identity, the way we create our culture, the essential difficulties we have with everything really comes out of this deep mentality that meat and dairy eating actually injects into us. And I said, gosh, it's going to be great. I can't wait to read a book that'll go into all that, explain the whole thing. And Madeline said, yeah, that'll be great to read that, And a few years went by, and finally she said, Will, I think if you want to read that book, you'll have to write it yourself. So I spent 5 years writing the World Peace Diet, and it was really interesting because when the book came out, have you heard of Donald Watson? Is anyone who Donald Watson is? Donald Watson is a guy who lived in England in the 1940s. He actually just died not too long ago, but in the 1940s, he coined the word vegan. He was a vegetarian, and he wanted a word that would account for motivation, because the word vegetarian, you can be a vegetarian for any old reason, right? So he wanted a word that would account for motivation, and it would include all abuse of animals. So he coined this word, and he made the definition, which is veganism is a philosophy and way of life which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practical, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. And so it was really neat for me, anyway, to hear when the World Peace Diet came out in 2005, and there was a journalist that was going over to England and doing a special interview with him. And he was at that point 95 years old, and in 2005. And someone, I guess, sent him a copy of The World Peace Diet, of my book. And my friend went over the next spring to do a final interview of Donald Watson, who coined the word vegan. And I remember he called me and he said, "Well, I just want you to know I'm here with Donald Watson." And even though the last time I was here, he was still walking around in the hills of England. He was kind of like Dixie, he seemed like never get old. He was just walking around doing great at 95. But now it's like 6 or 8 months later, and he said Donald Watson is now in his bed. He's just basically saying he's had a great life. It's time for him to leave the planet now. But I'm just calling you because I wanted you to know that what he does every single day is in the afternoon, he has his son-in-law read him The World Peace Diet. And he's saying this is the book that gives the message of what he was trying to say when he coined the word vegan. So I felt in a sense that the World Peace Diet is a book that someone had to volunteer to write it, and just in a sense to create a document that creates the foundation of a society where peace and freedom and justice and equality are actually possible. And it's been an enormous blessing, I feel, to be able to be part of this movement and to see the World Peace Diet. Now it's just been translated now into over 14 or 15 languages now. It just came out in Italian the other day. And so it's become kind of a global phenomenon, and we have, I think, a whole deepening happening in the vegan movement where we see that it's not enough to just understand this at a shallow level, that we're really called to understand this at a deeper level. Do I have to end at 4:30? Is that right? I just want to make sure I'm doing 4:30. Okay. So I'll close. I'm running out of time here on 4. This always happens. I'll just close maybe with a couple of quick things. One is that when we understand, I think, these ideas at a deeper level, we become much more effective as advocates. Because what I've seen is there's stages in veganism. And in the beginning stages, normally when we go vegan, it's because of we learn something, right? We either see a video like Forks Over Knives, how bad cholesterol and saturated fat are, so we eat a plant-based diet, we say we're vegans, or we see Earthlings or some other video, we come to a conference like this, we learn, so we go vegan, right? So that first stage I call shallow veganism. It's great, but we still don't really understand how to make healthy vegan food, what to say to people when they say, well, plants have feelings too. You go, oh God, I didn't think of that. Yeah, plants have feelings too. What do I do? We're kind of shallow vegans. We don't know which end of the chopstick is up or whatever. So we're kind of just figuring things out. And unfortunately, I see this because Madeline and I, we do over 100 events a year speaking, and I talk to a lot of people. So I've discovered over the years that someone says they're a vegan, and then maybe a year or two later, you talk to the same person, and they say, "Well, yeah, I was a vegan." So a lot of people get to the stage 1, the shallow vegan, and they somehow go back again because the pressure is unrelenting in many ways. The doctor says something, and my wife or husband or mother or kids or whatever it is. So we have to really make an effort, I think, to get more solid in the whole thing. So if we do, and there are people that get beyond stage 1 to stage 2, right? Stage 2 is a definite advance over stage 1. Stage 2 is the stage of the angry vegan. So now I've gotten past the shallow vegan. Now I'm the angry vegan. That's also really not that great either. Shallow vegan, I don't wish. That's a good stage to kind of get through that quickly if you can. But the angry vegan stage is also very understandable because now I understand the whole thing, right? I understand how to make healthy food for myself. I understand what to say to people when they say, well, plants have feelings too, come on. All these different things, and we understand, but we find that people, we're very often very articulate. We can talk about it, and people just ignore us. They don't say, oh, forget it. I like how it tastes. I'm going to eat it anyway. And so we start getting angry. We go out. We see all these people eating at Burger King, McDonald's, and they think it's great, and we think, oh, no, that's Murder King and Death in the Box and junk and terror and fear and pain and suffering. And they say, so you're a vegan? Yeah, I'm a vegan, but I'm telling you, I really don't want to live here anymore. It's just terrible, and how can I be happy when all these animals are suffering? So there's this kind of heaviness and anger and frustration that we very often feel as vegans, and very often we feel isolated. We're the only ones that understand this. The alternative to that very often is stage 2A, maybe, is what I call the closet vegan. So this is, you kind of avoid the angry vegan stage by just saying, so you're a vegan? No, not really. Just leave me alone. I won't say anything to you if you don't say anything to me. And so we just kind of stay, and be a closet. And neither one of those, I think, are really very satisfying. I think it's good to move beyond them to what I refer to as the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, the stages beyond that, generally subsumed under the rubric of deep veganism. And I think really when we start to move into deep veganism, it's fabulous, really. I mean, I know life on this earth is problematic in any event. It doesn't mean everything just becomes easy and comfortable. But it does mean, I think, as we begin to deepen our understanding of veganism and deepen our understanding of our society, and all these, and the forces at work that I've been trying to express here this afternoon, that we feel that we have a purpose, that we're here just for a short time on this planet as a human being, that this was already happening when we got here, that we can find ways that we can be effective and creative, that we can bring a message, that we can embody the message. I think the more we can embody veganism, which is really embodying kindness and compassion and caring and awareness and mindfulness, we can deepen our spiritual connection to the pure consciousness that we are and begin to live, really, the teachings of veganism. And I think as more and more vegans move beyond the first and second stage to this third stage and begin just embodying veganism so that we are living and breathing this understanding of kindness and compassion and really trying to refine our communication so that and our behavior and bring everything into alignment with a deeper understanding that veganism actually is, and realize that all of us, whether we're vegans or not, have all been wounded by our society. So just because we went vegan, a lot of people think, well, I went vegan, that's it, I'm done, right? I'm vegan, leave me alone. I'm vegan. Well, yeah, I'm perfect, I'm vegan. To realize that that's actually just the beginning of a very long, wonderful journey of further growth and development and maturity. And as we move along that path and we begin to embody this more and more deeply, that the circles of influence that we can have will just grow exponentially. And I think when we create a movement of people who are really embodying veganism, we'll have an unstoppable force. And it's happening. I think there's a maturing that's happening. There's an awakening that's happening. So when we go vegan, don't just stop there, but keep moving in your understanding. I think that's the most important thing. I think I have time. I really wanted to do this. Just close with a short video slideshow. So is that okay? Is everybody ready for a short slideshow? This is all right. Thank you. It's only a few minutes long, and what it is basically, I'm just going to play a little music at the piano, and then this hopefully will work. It's only like 5 minutes long. It's just animals living their lives, just to remember these beings we refer to as animals, these beautiful celebrations of life, and invite you, as you're listening to the music, to tune into what life is all about on this planet Earth. So enjoy. Here it goes. It's starting. Thank you. Bless you. Bless you all. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. An honor to be. Thank you. Bless you. Thank you. Yeah, all right. So it's time to move on to the next. I just want to say the art that you saw at the end is all done. Let's give Madeline, my wonderful wife, a big round of applause, too, for all her paintings and longtime vegan. And we're happy to cite. We have special on the World Peace Diet books and audio books. You get a free CD, and we're happy to talk to you afterwards here for a few minutes, and I guess we'll go to the table. So much love to you all, and keep up the great work you're doing. Thank you very much. Bless you all. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you. Is this something? Is this